Take his arm, girl, and act like you love him, or I shall be forced to let Lady Dorney win, and none of us could bear that." The words fell into the cold morning air of the conservatory like a stone into still water, and for one suspended breath Perrin, Duke of Belstead, did not understand that they had been spoken about him. He stood among his mother's orange trees with his gloves still in his hand, having come down only to escape the house, and now there was a stranger frozen 3 feet away with a basket of white roses pressed to her breast, staring at the Dowager Duchess as though she had been asked to leap from the roof. "Madam," Perrin said in the low, level voice that had silenced ministers and made grown men reconsider their errands, "you will explain yourself." His mother did not so much as glance at him. That was her particular gift. She had commanded this house through 2 dukes and the burial of one, and she had never once been ruled by the man who held the title. She was small and upright in grey silk, her hands folded upon the head of her cane, and her eyes, his own grey eyes sharpened by 70 winters, were fixed upon the flower cellar with the bright, dreadful patience of a general choosing ground. "There is nothing to explain," she said. "Lucasta Dorney arrives within the hour with her mother and her aunt, and that odious little poet they drag about like a lapdog, and she comes, Perrin, to announce your understanding, yours and hers. She has told half the county it is settled. She will stand in my conservatory and say it to my face, and if she finds you unattached she will make it true by nightfall, for you have not the wit to stop her. I have refused her 4 times. You have refused her 4 times, and she has heard 4 invitations, because a man who is not spoken for is, to a woman like Lucasta, merely a man not yet caught." The cane lifted an inch and came down upon the flagstones. "You will be spoken for, this morning, now." It was then that Perrin looked, truly looked, at the girl with the roses. She was perhaps 23, no more, in a brown wool cloth thin at the elbows and a bonnet that had been carefully, hopelessly retrimmed more than once. Her boots were wet through from the frost on the drive. She was not beautiful in the way the drawing rooms measured beauty. She wore no colour, she had no jewels, her hands were reddened from the cold and from work, and yet she held herself very straight. And she was looking at the Dowager Duchess not with the fawning terror he was accustomed to seeing on the faces of those who served him, but with a kind of steady, stricken honesty, as though she were doing sums in her head and did not care for the answer. "Your Grace," the girl said to his mother, and her voice was low and even, "I think you have mistaken me for someone who could be of use to you. I bring the roses from Ellingham's in the village. I am to be paid 2 shillings and to go home. That is the whole of what I am." 2 shillings, the Dowager repeated as if tasting the sum, and a walk of 4 miles back through the frost. "I should think, to a house where 2 shillings is wanted, is it not, miss?" A pause. The girl's chin came up half an inch. "Ellingham," she said. "Cordula Ellingham." "It is my father's shop." "Was my father's shop, was," said the Dowager softly, and Perrin, who missed very little, saw the small flinch the girl could not quite govern, and understood that his mother had found the seam and meant to press it. He felt something turn over in his chest that he did not welcome, an old, buried instinct to stand between a struck thing and the hand that struck it. He said. Both women looked at him. It was, he thought grimly, the first time in 20 minutes he had commanded a moment in his own house. "Miss Ellingham," he said, and he made his voice gentler than he had made it in a long while, because she was frightened and trying with all her strength not to show it, and that effort deserved better than his impatience. "You will forgive my mother. She has, in her enthusiasm, forgotten that people are not chessmen. You have delivered your roses. You will be paid 5 shillings, not 2, for the cold and the trouble of hearing all this, and Barton will see you to the kitchens for something hot before you go." He reached for the bell pull. He fully intended it to be the end of the matter. He was the Duke of Belstead. His word closed doors, ended entanglements, dismissed the world. He had built his whole life upon the discovery, made once and cruelly, that a great name attracts a great many performers, and that the surest safety lay in wanting nothing and letting no one near enough to be believed. 9 years he had held to it. 9 years since Diana Vane had let him love her through a whole glittering season, and had married Lord Wrensley the week the man's inheritance came clear, and had told Perrin, laughing in front of 40 people, that she had never thought a man so clever could be so easily flattered. He had not been easily flattered since. He had not been flattered at all, for he had let no one close enough to try. So he reached for the bell pull, and his mother's cane came down upon his wrist, not hard, but with the unanswerable authority of the woman who had once smacked that same wrist for reaching after sweets. "You will do no such thing," she said. "Perrin, look at me." And when he did, he saw that beneath the flint of her there was something he saw very rarely, fear real and old. "If Lucasta Dorney becomes mistress of this house, she will turn me out to the dower cottage within the 12-month and sell your father's library to pay her dressmaker. And she will make you a stranger in your own halls, because that is what she is, and I have watched her do smaller versions of it to smaller men my whole life. I am asking you, not commanding, asking. Give me 1 hour. 1 hour in which she believes you attached, and she will leave and she will not come back, for above all things that woman cannot bear to be seen to have lost." Perrin was silent. Through the tall glass panes of the conservatory he could see the drive curving away white and hard between the bare limes, and, far off, but not far enough, the dark shape of a carriage turning in at the lodge gates. "And you would have me lie," he said, "to a stranger's face, using a stranger's daughter as the prop. I would have you be spared," his mother said. "There is a difference, though you have never learned it." It was the girl who broke the silence. "I will not," Cordula Ellingham said. She said it quietly, and she said it to the dowager, and she was trembling. Perrin could see the roses shivering in their basket, but she said it plainly, and there was no calculation in it at all. That, more than anything, was what stopped him. He had spent 9 years learning to read the ledger behind every offered kindness, and here was a girl with 2 shillings to her name and a dead father's shop behind her, being offered, however monstrously, a chance to attach herself to a duke, and she was refusing it. "I beg your pardon," said the dowager, who had likely not been refused twice in a decade. "I will not stand in your beautiful room and let a lady believe a false thing, and be laughed at when it comes out, as it must come out, for I have not the dress nor the speech nor the least idea how a duchess's, how a great man's, how any of it is done." Her voice caught, steadied. "I sell flowers, your grace. I know the price of every bloom in that basket to the farthing, and I know I cannot afford to be found in a lie in the house of the greatest family in the county, for you will forget it by supper, and I shall be turned from every kitchen door for 20 miles. I have a sister at home who is 9 years old and who eats because I do not make mistakes. So I will take my 2 shillings if it please you, and I will go." She stopped, appalled, it seemed, at how much she had said. Colour had come up hard in her cold cheeks. She looked at the flagstones as though she might find some means of unsaying it there among the moss between the stones. The Dowager Duchess, for her part, said nothing at all, and that silence from a woman who answered everything told Perrin more than a speech would have. His mother was studying the flower seller now with a different quality of attention, the way a jeweller who has been handed what he took for paste turns it once toward the light and grows very still. And Perrin, the guarded duke, the man who wanted nothing, found that he could not, for the life of him, look away from her. He had heard 100 women in this house speak beautifully of their poverty as a kind of ornament. He had never once heard a person state the true arithmetic of their life so baldly, without a bid folded inside it. A sister of 9, 2 shillings, I do not make mistakes. She had refused a duke's mother to protect a child's supper, and she had been ashamed of the refusal, as though plain honesty were a rudeness she could not afford. Something in him, long shuttered, turned its face toward her the way a plant in that glass room turns toward the 1 bar of winter sun. "How much," he heard himself say, "is the shop in debt?" Cordula's head came up. "Your Grace, Ellingham's, your father's shop. He died and left it owing, and you are keeping the wolf from a 9-year-old's door 2 shillings at a time. How much?" She stared at him. The honesty in her would not let her lie even now, even to her advantage. £11, she said very low. "And some shillings. To Mr. Prewitt, the chandler, who holds the lease and has patient until Lady Day. £11. To him it was the cost of a coat he would not miss. To her it was the whole horizon of a life. He looked at his mother, and his mother looked back at him with the swift, gleaming comprehension of a woman who has spent her life watching men decide things, and he saw that she already knew what he would say before he knew it himself. "Miss Ellingham, Perrin set down his gloves upon the rim of a great porcelain urn and crossed the flagstones toward her, slowly, for she was skittish as a wild thing and he did not want her to bolt. I will not ask you to lie. My mother has put it wrongly, because she is frightened and frightened people speak in orders. Let me put it to you as a bargain instead, for I am told I am better at bargains than at almost anything. He stopped a courteous distance away. This near, he could see that her eyes were not brown as he had thought, but a dark hazel, and that she had wept recently last night. Perhaps alone had washed her face and come out to sell her roses anyway. For 1 hour, he said, you will take my arm and let a proud, cruel woman believe you are dear to me. You need not speak beautifully. You need only stand beside me and be exactly what you are, which is a good deal more than she is. When she has gone, my carriage will take you home so that you need not walk the 4 miles, and Mr. Pruitt the chandler will receive £11 and some shillings from my steward before Lady Day, with a note that the debt is discharged in full and no favour owed by you to any soul in this house. Not to me, not to my mother. You will owe nothing, you will simply be free of it, and your sister will eat, and you may forget you ever saw this room. He watched the war go across her face, the pride that wanted to refuse, the sense that would not let her, the terror of him, the arithmetic she could not help but do. That is not a bargain, she said at last, unsteadily. A bargain is fair. What you offer is, you would give a year of my life's wages for 1 hour of my standing still. I would give it, Perrin said, for 1 hour of not being managed, in my own house, on my own morning, into the arms of a woman I despise. You imagine you were one being purchased, Miss Ellingham. In truth you would be doing me the greater kindness, and I am not a man who says such things lightly, for I have not needed a kindness in 9 years and I dislike the sensation extremely. 9 years, she repeated before she could stop herself, and then softer, as though she had glimpsed the shape of a wound and drawn back from touching it. I am sorry. That was not mine to remark upon. No, he agreed. It was not. And yet you did not pretend you had not heard it, which is more than anyone in this house would have granted me. He found the corner of his own mouth wanting to move, and did not quite permit it. You will find, Miss Ellingham, that I am unaccustomed to being spoken to as though I were a man and not a monument. It is disconcerting. I recommend you continue. For the first time something flickered at the corner of her mouth that was very nearly the beginning of a smile, swiftly hidden, but he had seen it, and he found himself absurdly pleased to have earned it. The carriage was closer now. He could hear, faintly, the ring of hooves upon the frozen gravel and the high, carrying voice of a woman who never troubled to lower it because she had never in her life been told to. His mother said, quietly, Perrin, and there was a whole plea in the single word. Cordelia Ellingham looked down at the roses in her basket, white, faintly opening, cut that morning by her own reddened hands, and then she looked up, past the dowager, past the glass, to the dark carriage swaying up the drive, and Perrin saw her decide, saw her gather her fear, and fold it small and set her shoulders under it. 1 hour, she said, and I will not simper, your grace. I do not know how, and I will not learn it in the doorway. If she is to believe I am dear to you, she must believe it of a woman who looks her in the eye. I can do no other kind. I would not have you do any other kind, Perrin said, and meant it so completely that it startled him. He held out his arm. She hesitated one last moment, and in that moment he understood, with a clarity that unsettled him more than any of the morning's absurdities, that he was more afraid of that small distance being crossed than she was. For 9 years he had let no hand rest upon his sleeve that did not want his name or his money or his consequence. Now here was a hand that wanted only £11 and to be gone, and it hovered above his arm, and he found he was holding his breath like a boy. Then Cordelia Ellingham shifted the basket to her hip and laid her cold, chapped, honest hand upon the fine dogwool of his coat, and the touch of it went through him like the first that goes through frozen ground, painful and green and impossible to stop. She was near enough now that he caught the scent she carried, which was not perfume but the clean cold smell of the roses and of the outdoor morning, and it was, he thought, the first honest thing that had come near him in that scented, gilded house in longer than he cared to reckon. At the far end of the conservatory the doors were flung open by a footman, and a gust of frost came in, and with it a peal of bright laughter, and the rustle of a great deal of expensive cloth. "Belstead!" cried Lucasta Dorney, sweeping in upon a tide of furs and companions, her eyes going straight to him and then arrested, to the small brown figure at his side. Her smile did not falter, but something behind it sharpened the way a blade sharpens. "My dear Duke, but how charming. You have company." Perrin felt Cordula go rigid beside him, felt the tremor she was mastering travel through her hand into his arm, and he did the only thing that occurred to him, which was to lay his own hand over her small cold one where it rested on his sleeve, and hold it there, warm and certain, in full view of the room. "I have," he said. "Lady Dorney, allow me to present Miss Cordula Ellingham. I would ask you to be kind to her." He looked down at the top of the retrimmed bonnet, at the reddened hand beneath his own, and heard himself say the words that would set the whole of the rest of it in motion, and could not, afterward, decide how much of them had been performance and how much had been the plain truth breaking loose at last. "She is very dear to me." The words hung in the warm green air, and Perrin watched them land. Lucasta Dorney had a face made for drawing rooms, very fine, very white, with a small clever mouth that had learned early how to smile at one thing while thinking another. And he saw the smile hold and the thought behind it stagger, just for the length of a heartbeat, before she recovered her footing. She was too well made to gape, but her eyes went once, swiftly, down the length of Cordula Ellingham, from the carefully retrimmed bonnet to the boots dark with melted frost, and came back up again, and in that small journey Perrin read the whole of her, the counting, the appraisal, the private verdict that this could not possibly be what it appeared, and beneath all of it, thin and cold as the draught still curling in from the open doors, the first true doubt she had felt in the matter of the Duke of Belstead in a 12-month. "Dear to you," Lucasta repeated and laughed, a bright, pretty sound that did not touch her eyes. She let her furs slide from her shoulders into the arms of the poet, a soft, damp young man named, Perrin recalled, Mr. Finch, who wrote sonnets about her eyebrows and carried her raps like a spaniel, and came forward with both gloved hands extended, as though nothing at all had been said. "But how delightful, and how sly of you, Belstead, to keep her hidden. Here is my mother come 4 miles through the cold expecting to find you as glum and unattached as ever, and instead we find you quite transformed. Miss Ellingham, is it? Ellingham. I do not think I know the family." "You would not, my lady," Cordula said. She did not curtsy deeper than the courtesy required, and she did not drop her eyes, and Perrin, who had spent the better part of 2 decades watching people arrange their faces the instant Lucasta Dorney turned her attention upon them, felt the little jolt of it again, sharp and unlooked for. There was no scramble in her. There was only the plain answer given level, with the door shut gently behind it. "No," Lucasta agreed, and her smile thinned by a degree. "I dare say I would not." She turned the whole battery of herself back upon Perrin, tucking her hand into the crook of his free arm before he could prevent it, so that he stood absurdly bridged between the two women, the cold chapped hand upon his right sleeve, the warm scented glove upon his left, and felt the difference between them travel up both arms and meet jarring in his chest. "You must present me properly, Duke. My mother will want to hear everything. When did you meet? Where? For I confess I saw you not 3 weeks past at the Hartfields, and you were the very picture of a man who intends to die a bachelor to spite his relations." It was a trap, and a clumsy one, and Perrin had disarmed cleverer at the Board of Trade before breakfast. But he was aware, as he opened his mouth, of the small tense body at his right hand, of Cordula listening for whatever he would invent so that she might contrive to match it, and he found he did not want to hand her a lie to carry. She had told him plainly she would not simper. It seemed a poor return to make her memorize falsehoods in a doorway. "We met over flowers," he said, which was true. "She came to the house on an errand and stayed to correct me on the pruning of my mother's roses, in which she was entirely right and I entirely wrong, and I have found since that I dislike a room she is not standing in. You may make of that what you will, Lucasta. I have given up making anything of it myself." He farther than saw Cordula's head turn a fraction toward him. He did not look down. He had said more than the hour required, and rather more than he had meant, and the truth folded inside the fiction had come out so smoothly that he could not, standing there, have drawn the line between them with a ruler. Roses, said a new voice, dry as a turned page. How very pastoral. Lady Dorney the elder had come up the length of the conservatory at her leisure, leaning upon the arm of a gaunt sister whom she introduced to no one, and she surveyed the tableau through a gold-rimmed glass held to one eye with the air of a woman inspecting livestock she did not intend to buy. She was Lucasta grown old and gone to iron. The small clever mouth had set hard. The appraisal had ceased troubling to hide itself. Her glass travelled over Cordula and stopped upon the reddened hands. "You work, child," she observed. "Those are not idle hands." "They are not, my lady," Cordula said. "I keep my father's shop. We sell flowers and herbs and what the season gives." A shopkeeper. The old woman let the glass fall to the end of its ribbon. Belstead. A shopkeeper. And there it was, the sneer laid bare at last, no longer troubling with the tense of surprise. And Perrin felt the old buried instinct rise in him again, the one that had made him say enough to his own mother not an hour since, the instinct to put his body between a struck thing and the striking hand. But before he could speak, Cordula spoke, and what she said stopped the words in his throat. "Yes," she said, quite simply, and there was no shame in it at all, only a kind of clear steadiness, as though she had decided the ground she would stand on and meant to stand there. "A shopkeeper. My father sold flowers to half the county, my lady, and to more than one great house, and there were mornings he sent white lilies to a funeral and bridal roses to a wedding out of the same cart, and he used to say it taught a person that the grand and the humble come to the same florist in the end. I am not ashamed of the trade. It has never once lied to me about what a thing is worth." The old woman's glass came halfway up again and stopped. Lucasta laughed, too quickly. "How charming she is, Belstead. Quite a little philosopher. But you must not mind Mamma, Miss Ellingham. She is only surprised, as we all are, for the Duke is so very particular. He has refused," and here her voice took on a low, wounded music, pitched for the room. "He has refused a great many ladies, you know, of a great many houses. It is quite his reputation. One begins to wonder what a person must possess to succeed where so many have failed." It was aimed at Cordula and it struck Perrin, and he understood in the same instant that it was meant to. Lucasta was too practiced to bloody her own knuckles. She would make the flower seller feel the whole weight of her own unlikeliness, would set her to measuring herself against the ballrooms she had never entered, and let her flinch and stammer and betray, all on her own, the truth that she did not belong upon his arm. It was well done. It was the cruelty he had watched her practice on smaller people all her life, dressed up as flattery so that no one could name it aloud. He drew breath to end it. "I have wondered the same, my lady," Cordula said, before he could, and she said it lightly, almost gently, turning her hazel eyes full upon Lucasta with an honesty so complete it disarmed like a caress. "For I have asked myself more than once these last weeks what I could possibly have that so many finer ladies had not. I have no fortune. I have no name your mother knows. I have hands that will not come white though I scrub them till Sunday." She paused. "But I think, my lady, and you must forgive me, for I have only the plain speech of a shop, I think perhaps I asked the Duke for nothing. And I begin to suspect that, to a man who has been asked for a very great deal, by a very great many, a person who wants nothing of him at all must seem the rarest thing in England." The conservatory was very quiet. Somewhere among the orange trees a bird his mother kept for the singing of it tried 3 notes and thought better of them. Perrin did not move. He was aware of his own heartbeat, absurdly, of the small cold hand upon his sleeve, of Lucasta Dorney's white face gone a shade whiter. For it was unanswerable. The girl had wrapped the plain truth in courtesy and set it down in the middle of the room, where no one could pretend not to have seen it, and he was aware, above all, of a sensation he had not felt in 9 years and had believed, on the whole, to be dead in him, the plain, dangerous pleasure of watching someone he admired win, for she had not defended herself. That was the thing that undid him, standing there among the frost-fogged glass and the cut roses. A cleverer woman would have defended herself, a proud one would have struck back, a frightened one would have wept. Cordula Ellingham had done none of these. She had simply told the truth, that she had nothing, that she asked nothing, and let the truth do what truth does in a room full of people who trade in everything but it. And she had done it, he saw now with a lurch, not to wound Lucasta, but almost in kindness, as one might state a hard fact plainly to spare a person the longer cruelty of hope. "Well," said the Dowager Duchess into the silence, and Perrin heard, under the single dry word, something he had not heard from his mother in a very long while, which was delight. She came forward, her cane ringing on the flagstones, and she looked at Lucasta Dorney with the bright, pitiless courtesy of a general who has watched the enemy's line break and sees no reason to be gracious about it. "Lucasta, my dear, you are cold, and your mother is colder, and I am too old to keep my guests standing in a glass house in January to admire my son's judgment. Barton has laid tea in the yellow saloon. You will drink it and warm yourselves, and then you will have that 4 miles home again before the light goes." She smiled. "It was so very good of you all to come, on such a day, on such an errand." It was a dismissal dressed as hospitality, and everyone in the room knew it, and Lucasta, who above all things could not bear to be seen to have lost, had no choice but to receive it smiling, to gather her furs from the drooping poet, to say that of course they would take tea, that they were quite enchanted, that Miss Ellingham was a perfect original and Belstead a sly creature, and to move toward the doors on a tide of chatter that had gone, Perrin noted, half a tone too high. She had come to plant a flag and found the ground already taken. She would take her tea. She would go. But he saw her pause at the threshold and look back not at him, but at Cordula with a long, level, considering look that had nothing bright in it at all, and he understood that the war was not over, only adjourned, and that Lucasta Dorney had marked the flower seller down in some cold private ledger of her own for later. Then the doors closed behind the furs and the poet and the 2 hard old women, and the conservatory rang suddenly with the enormous quiet of their absence. Perrin became aware that Cordula's hand was still upon his arm, and that his own hand was still laid over it, and that neither of them had moved. He also became aware, with the particular clarity of a man who has spent his life managing his own face, that he was reluctant to move, and that the reluctance had nothing to do with any watching eye, for there were no watching eyes left but his mother's, and she had turned with unlikely tact to fuss among the orange trees. He looked down at Cordula. She was trembling again, now that it was over. Now that there was no one left to be brave in front of, the fear she had folded so small was unfolding all through her, and her breath came quick and shallow, and the colour that had risen to her cheeks in the fight was ebbing fast, leaving her white and spent. "You may let go," she said, not looking up. "She is gone. You need not hold my hand any longer, your grace. The hour is yours. I shall not cheat you of the minutes. Sit down," Perrin said, "before you fall down," and he steered her. She was too shaken to resist, and he was careful, so careful. The way a man is careful of a bird that has flown against a window and lies stunned in his cupped hands, to the long stone bench beneath the largest of the orange trees, and she sat, and set her basket at her feet, and put her 2 reddened hands over her face and breathed. He stood over her, ridiculously at a loss. He had commanded fleets of servants and benches of ministers. He did not, at that moment, know what a man was to do with a frightened girl in his mother's conservatory. So he did the only useful thing that occurred to him, which was to draw off his own gloves and hold them out, uselessly, and then, feeling the absurdity of it, to sit down upon the cold stone a decorous foot away from her, and wait, as though they had all the day in the world. "You did not need my defending," he said at last. "I had meant to defend you. I confess I am not accustomed to arriving too late to a rescue. You had ended it before I had finished drawing breath." She lowered her hands. Her eyes were bright and wet, but she was steadier now, and there was something rueful at the corner of her mouth. "I ought not to have spoken so to a lady. I shall pay for it likely some Tuesday when I have forgotten this room and she has not." She shook her head. "But she said I had succeeded where finer women failed, and she meant it to make me small, and I found I could not sit in it. My father used to say a lie will let you be anything except quiet. I have never been able to hold my tongue in front of an untruth. It is the great fault of my character, and it has cost me every situation I was ever fool enough to take." "It is not a fault," Perrin said. She gave a small, disbelieving breath that was almost a laugh. "You say that, your grace, because it was aimed at your enemy and not at you. Turn it about. Suppose I could not hold my tongue before an untruth of yours." She looked at him sidelong, and there was no impertinence in it, only that same clear honesty carried gently. You have been telling a very great one all this hour, that I am dear to you. If I were as free with a duke as I was with a viscount's daughter, I should have to say aloud that it is not so, that you found me in a doorway with a dead man's debt round my neck, and bought an hour of my company, and dressed it up in a pretty word. And that would be true, and it would be a rudeness I cannot afford, and so you see the fault costs me the way. She spread her reddened hands. It is a great deal easier to be honest when one is warm and fed. He was silent a moment. He had thought, when he devised the bargain, that the falseness of it would trouble her not at all, that a person in want takes what is offered and asks no questions of it, and he found instead that she had carried the lie about the room all morning like a stone in her shoe, and that it galled her more than the old woman's glass had. And if it were not entirely a lie, he heard himself say, and stopped, appalled at the words, and did not take them back. She turned her head and studied him, and did not answer, and the not answering was its own kind of mercy. The words came out of him quietly and with a weight he had not intended, and she looked at him, then truly looked for the first time since the doors had opened, no longer measuring the danger of him, but simply seeing him, a man on a cold bench with his gloves in his hand, and Perrin, meeting the dark hazel of her eyes across a foot of frozen stone, felt the last of his hour's composure go quietly out of him like breath. For 9 years he had built his life upon the certainty that everyone who came near him came for something, and that the safest posture in all the world was to want nothing and let no one close enough to be believed. He had held to it through 4 seasons of Lucostadorni's, through his mother's schemes and his own long grey evenings, and had kept him safe, and had kept him alone, and until this morning he had thought the 2 words meant nearly the same thing. Now he sat in the wreck of an hour he had bought for £11, watching a flower seller gather her frightened self back together on his mother's bench, and he was seized by a wholly unfamiliar and thoroughly unwelcome conviction that the performance was over, and Lucasta was gone, and the bargain was met, and that he had not the least desire in the world to send the carriage round. She was reaching for her basket. In a moment she would rise and thank him and go, and the £11 would be paid and the debt discharged and no favour owed, exactly as he had promised. And she would walk out of his glass house and out of his life with her roses over arm, and he would be a stranger to her by supper, as she had said, and safe again, and alone. Perrin looked at the top of the retrimmed bonnet, at the reddened honest hands closing round the handle of the basket, and discovered that he could not, for the life of him, look away, and that he did not want the hour to end. Chairs were brought, and a low table, and the good Sèvres that came out only for those the dowager wished to overawe, and within the quarter hour the conservatory had been turned into a drawing-room among the orange trees, with chocolate steaming in the little cups and a plate of ratafia biscuits that no one intended to eat. Perrin had contrived to seat Cordula upon the settle beside his mother, where the 2 ranks of silk and fur could not close about her, and he had taken the chair at her right hand, and there he sat with the particular stillness of a man guarding a door. Lucostadorni arranged herself opposite, upon the best of the chairs, and disposed her furs about her with the unhurried confidence of a woman who has never in her life sat down in a room where she was not the finest thing in it. Her mother, the elder Lady Dorney, took the seat at her elbow, a stouter, harder edition of the daughter, with the same pale eyes gone flat as old coins. The aunt, a Mrs. Haverstoke, settled with a great creaking of stays and a lorgnette she raised at Cordula the moment she was seated, as one might raise a glass to inspect a doubtful oyster. And behind them all hovered the poet Mr. Finch, a soft young man in plum-coloured coat who wrote sonnets to Lucasta's eyebrows and lived, it was universally understood, upon the dinners such devotion earned him. "Miss Ellingham," said Lucasta, when the chocolate had gone round. She let the name lie a moment in the warm air, turning it. "Ellingham. I do not think I know the family. Are you connected with the Ellinghams of Somerset, Sir Marmaduke's people?" "No, my lady," said Cordula. Her voice was low and steady, though Perrin, so near, could see the pulse going hard in her throat. "I am not connected with any people of that kind. My father kept the flower shop in Netherbelling. It is my shop now." A little silence fell, exquisite and deliberate, and into it Mrs. Haverstoke's lorgnette came up another inch. "A shop," repeated the elder Lady Dorney. with the faint wonderment of a woman encountering the word in its native habitat for the first time. How very enterprising. And do you stand behind the counter yourself, child, or have you a person to do it? I stand behind it myself, madam, and before it, and I cut the flowers, and I carry them. There is no person but me and my sister, and she is 9, so the carrying falls to me. 9, murmured Lucasta, and smiled, and her smile was the most frightening thing in the room, for it was perfectly kind to look upon. How affecting. Belstead, you sly creature, you never told us you had taken to collecting the picturesque. It is quite the fashion now, I hear. One keeps a little rustic about one, as our grandmothers kept a blackamoor page. So refreshing, so honest. She turned the smile upon Cordula like the beam of a dark lantern. And tell me, my dear, for I am consumed with curiosity, however did you contrive to meet a duke? One imagines your world and his do not often intersect. Perrin opened his mouth and felt his mother's hand come to rest, light as a moth, upon his sleeve, and closed it again, though it cost him. By the tradesman's door, my lady, said Cordula, I brought the roses. His Grace's mother had ordered white roses, and I brought them, and I was paid, and then his Grace was kind enough to keep me to warm myself before the walk home. That is the whole of it. I have kept nothing back, if that is what you fear. I have nothing to keep back. It is all as plain as I am. She said it without a tremor of self-pity, plainly, as one lays a true weight upon a true scale, and Perrin saw the smallest flicker of confusion cross Lucasta's lovely face, for cruelty of her sort fed upon the flinch, upon the small lie or the wounded blush. And here was a quarry that would neither run nor bleed. As plain as you are, said Mrs. Haverstoke, and gave a little laugh like the tapping of a fan. Well, one must admire such candour, though I confess, my dear, I cannot quite make out the arrangement. You will forgive an old woman. A duke does not warm a flower girl at his fire for the pleasure of her conversation, whatever the duke may say, and so I find myself wondering what precisely you are to be in this house before the day is out. The insult was so smoothly done that it took a full breath to feel its edge. And Perrin felt Cordula go very still beside him, and knew that the old woman had aimed with a courtier's precision at the one wound she could not parry, not her poverty, which she owned without shame, but the suggestion of her dishonour. The thing a poor woman guards more dearly than the rich guard their diamonds, because it is the only estate she has. Aunt, said Lucasta, in gentle reproof, and pressed her handkerchief to her lips to hide her satisfaction. You are too wicked. Miss Ellingham will think us unkind. Cordula set down her cup. She did it carefully, without a sound, and folded her reddened hands in her lap, and she looked at Mrs. Haverstoke across the little table with those dark hazel eyes gone perfectly level. You wonder what I am to be, she said. I will tell you what I am, madam, and you may build what you like upon it. I am a woman who has never yet taken a thing she did not earn, nor said a thing she did not mean, and who is therefore a great deal poorer than you, and sleeps a great deal sounder. She let that sit one moment. You have a lorgnette. I have never had need of one. I have found that if I wish to know the worth of a person, it is enough to listen to what they say of a stranger who cannot repay them for it. It was very quietly said. It was not loud, and it was not sharp, and that was the whole of its power. She had not raised her voice by a hair, and yet the words went round the little circle and found their mark and settled, and Mrs. Haverstoke's lorgnette came down of its own weight, and the old woman's mouth opened upon nothing at all. Perrin, who had sat through 1,000 exchanges in 100 gilded rooms, and had learned to keep his face a shut door through every one of them, felt something rise in his chest so sudden and so warm that he was obliged to look down at his own hands to master it. He had never in 9 years been defended in that room, nor seen anyone in it decline to be diminished. He had seen every stripe of person flatter, bargainnge, and swagger there, and he had thought he knew the whole compass of what could be done under the Dorney lorgnette. He had not known this could be done. He had not known a person could simply, courteously, refuse to be made small. The elder Lady Dorney recovered first, for she was the hardest of them. Well, she said with a laugh that had wire in it, Belstead, your rustic has a tongue. I hope, for her sake, she keeps it behind her teeth in company that signifies. It is one thing to be pert with an old woman who dotes on you, though no one in the room could have named a soul that Mrs. Haverstoke doted on. and quite another before those who might have the ordering of her bread. And there it was, the true threat, unsheathed at last, the reminder that a flower girl who gave offense to the great could be shut out of every service door in the county, could be made to starve for a sentence. Perrin saw Cordula understand it. He saw the fear come up in her again, the same fear he had watched her fold small and sit upon in the doorway an hour before, and he saw that this time it had a child's face behind it, a 9-year-old's supper, and that she would swallow the next insult, and the one after it, because she must. Because she could not afford the luxury of her own dignity twice in one morning, he found that he could not permit it. "Lady Dorney," he said, and though he did not raise his voice either, the whole room turned to him, for that was the one gift the great name had ever truly given him, that when he chose to speak, silence came meet the words. "You have twice now spoken of Miss Ellingham's bread as though it lay within this company's gift to grant or to withhold. I will ask you to speak of it no more. Her bread is her own. She earns it honestly, which is more than some in this room can say of their jointures, and any hand raised against her livelihood, in this county or out of it, will find that it has been raised against mine." The words were out before he had weighed them, and he heard, in the ringing quiet that followed, exactly what he had done. He had not intervened as a host smooths a rough moment. He had stepped fully in front of her, in the sight of the sharpest eyes in the shire, and pledged his whole consequence to the shielding of a girl he had known for the space of an hour. It was the precise opposite of everything he had done for 9 careful years. And the strangest part, the part he turned over afterward in the long solitude of the evening, was he did not regret it, not even under Lucasta Dorney's suddenly stripped and studying gaze. He felt, instead, unaccountably clean, as though he had put down a weight he had carried so long he had ceased to feel it as a burden. Lucasta was no fool. She looked from Perrin's face to Cordula's and back again, and whatever she read there caused her smile to alter, to thin and to fix, and to become at last the smile of a woman rearranging her campaign upon new and unwelcome ground. "How gallant," she said softly. "How very gallant. I see we have come at an inconvenient hour, Mamma. His Grace's attention is quite bespoke." She rose, and her furs rose with her, and her people rose in her wake as reeds rise after the wind that bends them. "We shall not tire you further, Belstead. But you will call, I think, when that novelty has faded. It always does, you know. The picturesque is charming in December. One finds it wears less well by June." She drew on her gloves, finger by finger, watching him. "Do give my love to the Dowager. And to your dear friend." The 2 words came out gloved as well, and cold. "I shall be quite fascinated to see how she does." Then she was gone, and the elder Lady Dorney after her, and the aunt still speechless, and the poet Finch trailing last with a backward look of pure bewilderment, as though he had come to witness a coronation and been shown a hanging instead, and the great doors closed upon the frost, and the ring of the carriage wheels dwindled down the drive, and was lost among the bare limes, and the conservatory was, all at once, only a warm glass room full of orange trees and the smell of chocolate going cold. For a moment no one spoke. Then the Dowager Duchess let out a long breath and leaned upon her cane, and looked at Cordula Ellingham with an expression Perrin had not seen upon his mother's face in the whole of his adult life. "Child," she said, "in 60 years I have watched a great many people take Lucasta Dorney's measure. I have never once seen it done in a single sentence, without heat, and to her face." She rose with the slow ceremony of the old, and she inclined her head, actually inclined it, the Dowager Duchess of Belstead, to a flower seller in a re-trimmed bonnet. "You have done this house a service it will not forget. I am going to lie down, for I am 70, and I have been frightened since dawn, and I find that terror at my age wants a settee to recover upon. Perrin will see to your comfort." And at the door she paused, and added, without turning, in a voice pitched for her son alone, "Do not be a fool twice in one lifetime, my dear," and was gone before he could ask her meaning, though he suspected he knew it. And then they were alone, the Duke of Belstead and the girl who sold flowers, in the long green silence of the conservatory, with the winter light coming grey and level through the glass. Cordula rose at once. "I should go," she said. "The hour is more than done. You have kept your part of it, your grace, and passed it. I will not trespass on." "Sit down," Perrin said, and then, hearing the old iron in it, softened it. "Forgive me. I have given orders so long I have forgotten how to make a request. Will you sit? A moment only. I find I am not ready for the room to be empty. She looked at him a long moment, weighing him, and then she sat, on the edge of the settle, her basket at her feet, upright and wary as a bird that has lit within reach of a hand it does not yet trust. You should not have said it, she told him, what you said to the elder Lady Dorney, about your hand and hers. Her brow was troubled. It was kindly meant, and I thank you for it, but it was not wise. Now she believes it. Now they all believe it, and it is not for 1 hour any longer. It is a thing that will be talked of at every table between here and the coast, and when it comes apart, as it must, your grace, for it is not true, it is I who will be found standing in the wreck of it, not you. You have your walls and your name. I have a shop with £11 owing and a lease that runs to Lady Day. Perrin was silent. He had expected thanks or the soft beginning of the campaign. Every woman began sooner or later, once she saw the door to his consequence ajar. He had not expected to be told, gently and truly, that his gallantry had endangered her. It was so exactly the opposite of flattery that he did not, for a moment, know how to stand against it. You are the only person in 9 years, he said slowly, to reproach me for defending you. Then you have been badly served by people frightened to reproach you at all. She said it simply, not as impertinence, but as fact, and looked down at her chapped hands. A man no one contradicts is a man kept in a kind of prison, I should think, however fine the walls. My father used to say that flattery is only fear wearing its Sunday coat. He was a foolish man about money and a wise one about people, and he died leaving me both halves. She glanced up. I am sorry. I do it again. I say more than I am asked. It is the shop. One learns to fill silences, or the customers walk out. No, said Perrin. Do not be sorry. He heard how much he meant it and did not trouble to disguise it. I have spent this whole strange morning being lied to and managed and admired, Miss Ellingham, and I find that I would sooner be scolded honestly by you than praised by every soul who came in at that door. It is a novel sensation. I have no notion what to do with it. She considered him with that steady, sums-doing look he was already beginning to know. You keep saying such things, she said, as a man says them who has decided he is safe in saying them, because the person he says them to will be gone by nightfall and can carry them nowhere that signifies. I am not offended by it. I understand it. A great many people speak freely to the flower girl for the same reason they speak freely to the dog, because it cannot repeat them and asks nothing back. She paused and her voice gentled, and it was the gentleness that undid him, for it held no reproach at all, only a plain and level pity that was somehow worse. But you should be careful, your grace. You are lonelier than you know, I think, and lonely man will mistake the first person who does not want anything from him for a great deal more than she is. I am only a woman who sells flowers. Do not build a cathedral on me. The frost will have it down by spring. He looked at her for a long moment and could not, for once in his life, find the shut-door face he had worn for 9 years, because she had reached behind it and named the very thing it guarded, without malice, without a bid, as one might tell a man kindly that his coat was torn. That, he said at last, very low, is the truest and the most unwelcome thing that has been said to me in a decade. I ought to thank you for it. I find instead that I resent it extremely, which my mother would tell you is the surest sign that a thing is true. Something eased at the corner of her mouth, not quite the smile she had swallowed in the doorway, but its near cousin. You might, she said, do nothing with it at all. That is generally what is done with a sensation. It passes. It has not, however, he said, shown the least inclination to pass, and he found that he had leaned toward her, that the grey light had gathered in her dark eyes, and that he wanted, with an urgency that had nothing of design in it and frightened him more than Lucasta Dorney and all her furs, only to keep her there, in the cold green quiet, saying true things to him, for as long as the failing winter light would allow. It was the cold that saved him in the end, or perhaps undid him further. He could never afterward decide which, for as he leaned toward her across the frozen foot of stone, close enough to see the fine chap of the winter upon her lip and the dark, grave attention in her eyes, the great doors of the conservatory sighed on their hinges and Barton came in with a candle branch against the failing light. and the spell that held them both was broken as cleanly as ice underfoot. Perrin straightened. He was a duke again. He had had a lifetime's practice in becoming one at need. But his heart was going like a boy's, and he was obliged to fold his hands behind his back so that she should not see that they were not quite steady. "The carriage, your grace," said Barton, with the beautiful blindness of a servant who has seen a great deal and reported none of it in 40 years. "Coombe begs me say the greys have been standing since the Dorney party, and the near one has gone lame in the off for with a stone. He is drawing another pair from the far stable, but it will want the better part of an hour in this cold, and he did not like to bring them round half frozen and risk the beast. He was right not to." Perrin heard the evenness come back into his own voice and was grateful for it. "Tell him to take his time and warm them properly. Miss Ellingham is in no hurry to be turned out into the dark." He saw Cordula open her mouth to say that she would as soon walk, that she had walked 4 miles that morning and would think nothing of walking them home again in the black cold with a lame conscience for company, and he forestalled her before the words could form. "You will not walk," he said. "I have discharged one debt to your father's memory today. I do not mean to earn a fresh one by sending his daughter into a January night on my account. An hour, Miss Ellingham. Sit an hour in the warm and go home behind good horses, and let that be the last of what this house asks of you." He paused. "The conservatory is beautiful, and it is also very cold, and my mother keeps it so on purpose, for she says warmth spoils the oranges, and she prefers her fruit to her guests. Come where there is a fire. I will not tease you with more chocolate. But there is a room I think you may like to see, if you will let me show it to you, and it is warmer than any in the house." She rose slowly, her basket in her hand, that wary sums-doing look going over him once more, weighing the offer, weighing the man, turning both toward what light there was to see whether they were what they claimed. Then she gave the smallest nod, as one accepts a thing one has decided not to be afraid of, and followed him out of the green cold and into the house. He took her the back way, along a stone passage the guests never saw, past the still room and a door from behind which came the good smell of bread, because he understood without being told that she would rather not cross the great hall in her mended boots with a footman at every pillar. It was a small courtesy, and she marked it. He saw her mark it, saw the flicker of surprise that a man of his consequence should have troubled to think of it, and the surprise stung him more than any reproach could have. For it told him plainly how little kindness she had learned to expect from people such as he. The library lay at the end of the west range, and when Perrin opened the door upon it the firelight came out to meet them, red and living, from a hearth a footman had kept banked all day against his lordship's habit of reading late. It was a long room, 2 stories of it, galleried in oak, and the books climbed every wall to the painted ceiling, thousands of them gilt-lettered along their spines, breathing that particular smell of leather and dust and old paper that is like no other smell on earth. Cordula stopped just inside the door, and Perrin, watching her as he had somehow fallen into the habit of watching her, saw her face do a thing he had not seen it do all that strange day. It opened. The guard went out of it. She looked up and up at the galleries and the ladders and the ranked gold of the spines, and her lips parted, and for a moment she was not a woman keeping her countenance in a great man's house, but only a person standing before something she loved. "Oh," she said, very low. Oh, he would have wept. Your father. He could scarce read above a broadsheet. He had no schooling to speak of my father. He taught himself his letters off seed packets and the labels on the physic. But he loved a book the way a hungry man loves the smell of a kitchen he cannot go into. She came forward a step and put out her hand as though to touch the nearest shelf, and drew it back. He had 11 books in all his life, and he kept them wrapped in oilcloth in the dresser. And on a Sunday he would take one down, and I would read it to him, for I had the schooling he had not, the dame's school, 2 winters of it, till the money went, and he would sit with his eyes shut and his pipe cold in his hand and say, "There, Cordy, there say that part again." What became of them? The 11. She was quiet a moment. 10 of them went to Mr. Pruitt against the debt, with the cart and the good scales and my mother's ring. He would not take the 11th. He is not a cruel man, Pruitt, only a frightened one, like most that press for money, My father used to say a creditor is a coward with a ledger. So I have the one. A herbal it is, with the flowers all drawn and coloured by hand, and their properties set down in a small crab print. It is worth nothing to anyone but me, and it is worth the world. She turned from the shelves to look at him, and there was no self-pity anywhere in her, only that clear, level telling of the facts of her life, as she had told them in the doorway that morning. You need not look so grave, Your Grace. It is not a sad story. A great many people have lost a great deal more than 10 books and a pair of scales. You lost your father, I did, in the spring, of a lung fever that took him in 9 days and left the shop to me and Bess in a debt like a millstone. She said the name and softened at it, could not help it. Bess is my sister. She is 9. She has our father's eyes and no notion at all of how near we have sailed to the wind these 10 months. And I mean her to keep that ignorance as long as ever I can contrive it, for a child should not lie awake doing the sums a grown woman can scarce bear to do by daylight. She set her basket down at last upon the corner of a great reading table, as though she had decided to be, for 1 hour, a guest and not a tradeswoman. So I carry the flowers myself, and I keep the accounts myself, and I turn the bonnet myself, and I do not make mistakes. You have heard me say it. It is the whole of my creed. I do not make mistakes, because I cannot afford even the smallest one. And a girl who cannot afford a mistake learns very fast to see the true shape of things, which is why I saw the true shape of this morning, Your Grace, and told you of it plainly, and why I am telling you now that you should not have brought me to this beautiful room. Why should I not? Because it is easier to be sensible in a cold place. She said it simply and looked into the fire, and the light of it moved on her face. The conservatory was honest, it was cold and green, and it asked nothing, and it let a person keep her wits. This, she lifted her eyes again to the gold and the firelight and the long, warm, book-breathing hush of the room. This is a room made to unmake a person's caution. It is a great deal harder to remember what one is in a place like this, and what one is not. Perrin crossed to the hearth and stood a little apart from her, looking down into the coals, because he did not trust his own face, and the fire gave a man somewhere to put his eyes. He was aware, with the ruthless clarity that had made him what he was at the board and in the house, and in every hard room he had ever governed, that he ought to say something light, and ring for the tea, and let the hour run out into safe and easy nothings, and put her in the carriage, and never see her again. That was the sensible course. That was the course a man kept who had learned, once and cruelly and in front of 40 laughing people, exactly what it cost to let a want get loose in him. He had held to it 9 years. It had never once failed him. And he found, standing at his own hearth with the firelight on a flower seller's grave face, that he did not want to keep it any longer, and the not wanting frightened him more than any peril the day had held. There is a thing your father was right about, he said instead, and a thing he was wrong about. He was right that a creditor is a coward with a ledger. I have sat across a table from 100 of them. He turned from the fire and faced her. He was wrong that flattery is fear in its Sunday coat. Or rather, he was right about the flatterers, but he did not reckon on the ones who do not flatter at all, and what they can do to a man who has forgot such people exist. You have not paid me one false word since the doors opened this morning. You reproached me for defending you. You have just now told me in my own library that I should not have brought you here, and given me a better reason for it than I could have given myself. Do you know that in 9 years no one has told me a true thing in this house that did not first count what it might gain by the telling? Do you know what you sound like to a man so long fed on sugar? You sound like water. You sound like the plainest, coldest, sweetest water, and I did not know until this morning how thirsty I had grown. She did not answer at once. She had gone very still, the way she went still when she was frightened, and he understood that he had done to her precisely what she had warned him against. He had built, in the space of 3 sentences, a first course of the cathedral she had begged him not to raise, and still he could not be sorry. And still he did not stop. I know what you will say, he went on more quietly. You will say I am lonely, and mistaking the first honest voice for more than it is, and that the frost will have it down by spring. You said it in the conservatory, and you were not wrong to. But you spoke it as a warning against a folly, Miss Ellingham, and I am not sure it is a folly. I am 35 years old. I have refused every woman my mother and the county have thrown across my path, and I did not once, in refusing them, feel that I had lost anything. I have felt, since this morning, that if that carriage takes back to your shop, and I do not contrive to see you again, I shall have lost something, and I am too old and too careful a man to feel such a thing lightly, or to say if I did not mean it to be weighed. The herbal. He had crossed to a low shelf near the fire, without quite knowing he did it, and drawn down a small volume, an old hand-coloured herbal of his grandmother's that he had thought of the instant she named her father's one book. The herbal was in his hands, and he held it out to her across the little space between them. Here, he said, there is more than one such in the world, you see. Look. She took it, and their hands were near upon the worn leather cover, near enough that he felt the cold coming off her fingers and the warmth going out of his own toward them, and neither of them, for a long moment, quite let go. She opened it upon a plate of a wild rose drawn 300 years before, and bent her head over it, and a strand of dark hair came loose from the retrimmed bonnet and fell against her cheek, and Perrin, the guarded duke, the man who wanted nothing, lifted his hand to put it back. Before he had told his hand to move at all, he stopped himself a breath from her skin. His fingers hung in the firelit air a hair's breadth from the loose curl and the cold cheek beneath it, and she went utterly still under the not-quite touch, and lifted her eyes to his, and neither of them breathed. He could have counted the flecks of gold in the hazel. He could have counted his own heartbeats. It would have been the easiest thing in the world, and the sweetest, to close that last thread of distance, and it would have been, he knew, the taking of exactly the advantage she had every cause to dread from a man who held her father's discharged debt in his gift and her livelihood, if he chose, in his hand. He drew his hand back. He put it behind him, out of temptation, and stepped away, and gave her the room to breathe again, because whatever else he had begun in that library he would not have it begun on any terms, but true ones freely given. "Forgive me," he said low. "I had no right." "No," she said, and her voice was not quite steady either. She closed the herbal with great care and set it down upon the table beside her basket, and pressed the loose strand back herself with a hand that trembled. "No, you had not, and I had none to let you." She drew a breath. "You see now why I said we should have stayed in the cold. I do." He made himself smile, though it cost him. "You are a wiser steward of us both than I am, Miss Ellingham. You always have been, since the doorway. Very well, I will not lay a hand upon you nor a word you have not asked for. But I will ask you one thing, and you may refuse it, and the debt stands discharged, and the carriage stands ready either way, so hear it knowing you owe me nothing." He drew himself up, and it was the hardest bargain he had ever set himself to strike, and the least like a bargain. "Lucasta Dorney will not stay gone, you heard her. She will come again when she judges the novelty faded, and if she finds you vanished and me alone, she will begin the whole siege afresh, and my mother will be turned out to the dower cottage and the library sold to a stranger. And I shall be married by June to a woman who will make me hate my own halls. This morning bought us an hour. It did not buy us the war." He paused. "Let it stand a little longer. Not a lie. I will tell no one you are what you are not. Only let it be believed, as it is believed now, that you are dear to me. Come to the house. Let the county see it. Give me the season, Miss Ellingham, and I will settle upon your sister a sum that puts her beyond the reach of any frost forever, whatever comes of it, whether you can ever bring yourself to think of me at the end of it or no." She looked at him a long, long moment, and he saw the whole war go across her face again, as it had gone that morning. The pride, the sense, the fear, the arithmetic she could not help, and beneath all of it, this time, something new and unwilling that he did not dare to name, lest naming it should frighten it away. "You are doing it again," she said at last, very softly. "You are dressing a true thing in a bargain, because you dare not hold it out bare. I sell flowers, your grace. I know a discount from a gift." She picked up her basket, and held it before her like the small shield it had been all day, and her eyes were bright. "I will come. God forgive me, and forgive us both. For I told you not to build the cathedral, and here I am carrying up stones. I will come, and let it be believed, and take nothing for it but Bess's safety, which I will not pretend I am strong enough to refuse. But you will remember what I told you in the conservatory, Perrin of Belstead, when the spring comes and the frost has done its work, that I warned you, plainly, in a cold green room, before ever you brought me where the fire could make a fool of either of us. You will remember that I told you first. Somewhere far off in the great house a bell rang, and Barton's step came measured down the stone passage to say the horses were warm and the carriage stood at the side door where no footman waited, and Perrin, watching her gather herself to go out into the dark on a bargain that was not a bargain, felt the whole 9 years' wall in him gone to rubble at his feet, and knew, with the cold, sure knowledge of a man who had read 100 ledgers, that he had staked far more than a settlement upon a woman who had told him, twice now and to his face, exactly how it was likeliest to end. The fortnight that followed was, Perrin came slowly to understand, the happiest he had passed in 9 years, and it was precisely for that reason that he began to be afraid. He had contrived, in that time, a great many reasons for Cordula Ellingham to come up to the great house, none of them, if a man examined them, quite honest. The conservatory wanted fresh flowers twice in the week, where before it had wanted them never. His mother had discovered in herself a sudden passion for forced hyacinths that could be satisfied only by Ellinghams, and only, it seemed, by the proprietress in person. He had ridden down to Nether Belling upon errands he invented on the road, and had stood in the low, sweet-smelling shop, with his head bent beneath the beams, while a 9-year-old with her sister's grave eyes weighed him lengths of ribbon he did not want. And he had carried the ribbon home and could not afterward have said what became of it. Twice he had walked her back through the winter dusk, the 4 miles she was used to walking alone, and had learned in those walks more of her, of the father dead in the spring, of the mother longer gone, of the small fierce economies by which a girl of 23 kept a child and a shop and a name all upright at once, than he had learned of any living soul in a decade. She never once asked him for anything. That was the marvel that undid him afresh each time. She took the flowers he praised and named their honest price. She took the arm he offered upon the icy stiles and gave it back at the gate. She took nothing else and wanted nothing else, and looked at him always with those level hazel eyes that saw the man and not the monument, and did not flinch from either, and that was the trouble. That was the very thing that woke him in the black cold hours before the maids came to lay the fires, staring up at the canopy his father had died beneath, with his heart going hard and unruly in his chest like a horse that scents smoke. For he knew what this was. He had felt it once before. 9 years before he had lain awake in just this way, sick and glad and certain, over a woman who had laughed at him at last before 40 people and gone off to marry a better income. He had sworn in the grey ruin of that season that he would never again hand any living creature the whole of himself and stand there, open-handed, waiting to be believed. And here he was doing it. Here he was, a man who had governed a duchy and cowed a cabinet, lying sleepless over a flower girl's chapped hands, and the old wound in him had begun to weigh an old wound aches before weather, and to whisper in Diana Vane's bright and long-ago voice that no one came near the Duke of Belstead for the sake of the man inside the name. He did not believe it of Cordula. That was the strange and terrible part. Lying awake, he did not believe it. But he had learned at great cost not to trust the things he did not believe when the sun was up, and so he did what such men do. He reached for the one tongue he could still speak without fear, the tongue of settlements and securities and instruments under seal, and he told himself it was devotion when it was only terror wearing devotion's good coat. He sent for Marsh, his steward, on a grey morning near the fortnight's end, and he had him draw up a deed. It was, he told himself, the most generous thing a man could do. It was, he told himself, precisely the ridding of her of every care that had bowed her small straight shoulders since her father died. He instructed Marsh to settle upon Miss Cordula Ellingham of Nether Belling, and upon her sister after her an annuity of £200, to purchase outright the freehold of the shop, and the cottage behind it, and convey them to her free of any lion, to see that neither she nor the child should ever again want for coal or physician or the price of a winter cloak. Marsh, who had served 2 dukes and learned to keep his face, kept it, and asked only, with the driest possible caw, whether his grace wished the instrument to name the nature of the obligation it discharged. Perrin told him rather too sharply that there was no obligation, that it was a gift. Marsh bowed and wrote it fair, and Perrin sent word down to the village that Miss Ellingham was desired at the house upon a matter of business, And then he walked the length of the long gallery 7 times, past the painted dukes who had none of them ever been afraid of anything, and waited to be made safe. She came at 3, with the frost still white in the hollows of the drive, and she came into the small east room where he had chosen to receive her. Not the conservatory, he had thought, not the place that had become theirs. This was business. With a brightness in her he had not seen before, an ease, as though the fortnight had worked upon her as it had worked upon him. She had a spray of Christmas roses in her hand, the white hellebore that flowers in the dead of the year, and she held it out to him before he could speak. "I brought these," she said. "They were not ordered. I know you did not order them. They grow wild on the north wall of the churchyard, and I thought of you when I saw them, for they have no business at all blooming in this cold, and yet there they are." Then she looked at his face, and the brightness in her checked and steadied. "You are grave. Has something happened?" "Is it the dowager? My mother is well." He did not take the flowers. He had meant to, and found he could not, with what lay upon the table between them, and he saw her mark that he had not, and saw the first small shadow cross her. "Miss Ellingham, Cordula, will you sit? There is a thing I wish to put before you, and I have thought a great deal upon how to say it, and I am no nearer knowing, and so I will do it as I do all such things, which is badly and directly." She sat. She laid the white hellebore in her lap and folded her hands over it, and waited, and something in her stillness had gone weary again, the wariness of that first morning, the bird lit within reach of a hand it did not trust. He turned the papers toward her. He told her what they were. He heard his own voice go smooth and level and steward-like as he told it. The 200 a year, the freehold, the child's portion, the coal, and the physician and the cloak. And he watched her face as he spoke. And he was so full of his own fear and his own generosity that he was halfway through before he understood that she had gone perfectly white, and that the worriness in her eyes had become something else, something he had put there. "I want you to understand," he pressed on, because he had begun and did not know how to stop, "that no obligation attends it. I was most particular with Marsh upon the point. You would owe nothing, not to me, not to this house. It is yours wholly and freely, whatever comes. You need never carry roses through the frost again. You need never lie awake over a chandler's bill. Your sister will be provided for to the end of her days. I have the means to do this without feeling it, Cordula, and it would give me more peace than I can well express, to know you safe, to know that the cold and the counting were over for you, that you were kept," she said. The word fell into the room the way his mother's words had fallen that first morning into the still water of his life, and it stopped him as nothing else could have stopped him. "That is the word, is it not?" she said, very quietly. She was looking at the papers, at the fair clerkly hand, at the space left blank for her name. "There is a great deal of ink here, your grace, and a great many pounds, and it comes to that one word, if a body sets it plainly, and I am obliged always to set things plainly, for I cannot afford the other kind. You would keep me. You would buy the shop and the cottage and the coal and the cloak, and settle upon me an income no honest flower girl earns in 10 years of frost, and I should have only to— What is it I should have to do, in exchange for never counting again? You said no obligation. But a woman kept in a cottage a great man has bought for her is understood, your grace, in every village between here and the coast, to be under an obligation, whether it be written in the deed or no. That is not—" He rose appalled, the chair grating on the boards behind him. "You mistake me. I do not mean, it is not that. Upon my soul it is not that. I meant only to see you safe. I have lain awake a fortnight over the thought of you walking that road in the dark and the wet, over the thought of the child going cold, and I would put an end to it, that is all. I would only put an end to it. I meant it as kindness." "I believe you did." She rose too, the white flowers falling unregarded from her lap to the carpet, and she did not stoop for them. "That is the cruel part of it, that you meant it kindly. A wicked man I could have answered and gone home lighter. But you are not wicked, and so I must stand here and tell you what you have done, and you will not thank me for it, for no one ever thanks the flower girl for the true thing." Her voice did not rise. It never rose. That was its whole power, and it broke him now as it had broken Mrs. Haverstoke a fortnight since. "These past weeks I let myself forget what I am to you. That was my fault, and I will not lay it at your door. I walked with you in the dusk, and I let you carry the ribbon my sister sold you, and I told you of my father, whom I have told to no one, and I let myself think. I let myself begin to think. She stopped. She pressed her lips together and mastered it, and when she went on her voice was steady again, and worse for being steady. And all the while you were reckoning what I cost. You have been reckoning it since the first morning. £11 and some shillings to be free of me the once. 200 a year to keep me by. You are a man who buys his peace, your grace, because you have never in your life been given it for nothing, and you cannot believe that anyone would give it you for nothing. And so you reach for the deed and the seal, because that at least you understand. She looked at him with something that was not anger. He could have borne anger, but a plain, level, terrible pity. I do not want your £200. I never wanted your 11. I let you pay it for my sister's sake, and I have hated myself a little every day since. What I wanted, God forgive me the folly of it, was to be walked home in the dark by a man who did not think, the whole 4 miles of what I was worth. And there was the moment, and Perrin would turn it over on the rack of his own memory for the rest of his days. There was the moment when he might have crossed the small distance between them and taken the cold reddened hands that had brought him the flowers that would not stop blooming, and told her the true thing, which was that he had drawn the deed because he was afraid, because she had come too near, because he had loved once where his love was counted and laughed at and sold, and could not do it open-handed again. He did not do it. The old wound spoke first, as it had spoken in the black hours, and it spoke in Diana Vane's laughing voice, and it was full of 9 years of fear, and it made him proud when he should have been humble, and cold when he was in truth only terrified, and it put into his mouth the worst words of his life. I had thought, he said, and heard the frost come into it, the shut-door voice, the Duke's voice, and could not stop it, that whatever else you were at least honest about the price of things. It seems even you would rather be courted with pretty walks in the dusk than provided for like a sensible woman. Forgive me, I mistook you for the one creature in England who knew the worth of a settled income. I ought to have offered you sonnets like Finch. It appears the flower girl has learned, after all, to prefer the flowers to the fee. He knew, before the last word had left him, that he had killed the thing. He saw it die. He saw it go out of her face the way the light had gone grey and level through conservatory glass that first afternoon. And he would have given the whole of the 200 a year, the freehold, the name, the halls, the painted unafraid dukes and all, to have the words back in his mouth and swallowed. She was silent a long moment. She bent at last, and gathered the white hellebore from where it had fallen, gathered each fallen bloom with those careful hands, and straightened, and held them not out to him now but against her, the way she had held the roses that first morning, pressed to her breast like a small shield. There, she said softly, now I know, I am obliged to you, your grace, truly, for I had begun to be foolish, and you have cured me of it very thoroughly, and at no cost to yourself at all, which I dare say is how you like your bargains. She dropped him a curtsy, a proper one, a full one. The curtsy owed to a duke by a girl who sells flowers, and it was the most dreadful thing he had ever received, for it put back between them, in a single graceful sinking motion, every inch of the distance the fortnight had closed. I will send back the £11 by Lady Day. It will take me a little time, but you shall have it, every shilling, for I find I cannot keep it now. Do not send Marsh to the shop again. I would take it as a kindness, a true one, the only sort I want from you, if you did not. Cordula. Miss Ellingham, she said gently, unanswerably, and it was the shutting of a door as surely as anything he had ever done with his level voice, and it closed as quietly. Then she was gone, no sweep of furs, no ring of carriage wheels. Only the small brown figure passing out through the tall glass doors and down the frost-white drive, walking, as she had always walked, the 4 miles home in the failing light, with the flowers that had no business blooming held against her heart. And Perrin stood alone in the small east room among the scattered generous papers, with the freehold and the annuity and the child's portion all drawn fair and useless upon the table, and understood, for he had done in one afternoon, the very thing his mother had feared he would do, and that he had not been made safe at all. He had reached for the deed to keep from being hurt, and had used it to strike the one blow he could never call back. He crossed to the window and watched her out of sight, past the bare limes, past the lodge, until the winter dusk took her, and the old iron habit of 9 years told him it was better so, cleaner so, that a wanting man was a man in danger, and he was now, at least, in danger no longer. And he found that he did not believe a word of it, that the room was colder than the frost outside it, that his mother's voice came back to him across the empty afternoon, "Do not be a fool twice in one lifetime, my dear," and that he had gone and been exactly that, with his eyes open, in full and unhurried possession of every warning he had been given. He bent, after a long while, and picked up the 3 white hellebore blooms she had not noticed dropping in her flight, and turned them in his fingers in the dark, the flowers that had no business at all blooming in such cold, and yet had bloomed, and yet she had thought of him when she saw them, and had gathered them along the churchyard wall with her bare hands and carried them 4 miles to lay in his, and he set them with a care that would have astonished any man who had ever feared him across a council table. In the little cup upon the mantel, where the last of them might have water at least, though he knew they would not last the night, he was still standing before the cold hearth when the house clock struck the hour below. With no notion under heaven of how a man went about undoing a thing he had broken on purpose, to a woman too proud and too poor and too honest ever to come near his door again, knowing only that the road she walked home lay dark and long and cold, and that he had sent her down it alone, and that the fault, from first to last, from the £11 to the very worst of the words, was his and no one else's in all the world. 4 days the house had been quiet, and the quiet was the loudest thing Perrin had ever lived inside. The great rooms of Belstead had been built for silence, for the measured tread of a man who need never raise his voice to be obeyed. He had thought once that he preferred it so. Now the same hush sat upon him like a verdict already handed down, and would not lift. And he moved through his own halls like a man come back to a house where someone has died, forgetting between one door and the next why the light seemed changed, and then remembering, and it was always the same remembering, and it was always the same wound. He knew to the hour when it had begun. He knew if he made himself be honest, and he was learning, too late, to make himself be honest, that he knew it to the word. It had been the long gallery, and the card tables set out, and the county gathered under the branch candles with the January dark pressed black against the tall windows, and Lucasta Dorney, who never struck until she was certain of her ground, had brought the thing at last to its point. She had done it prettily. She had asked him, in that soft carrying voice that was made to be overheard, whether it could truly be as the town said, that his Grace had taken up a flower girl out of the market, and seated her at his own table, and suffered it to be put about that he... And there she had left the sentence open, like a gin trap with the jaws drawn back, and smiled and waited, and every face along the gallery had turned, and Cordula had been standing by the far window with the cold light on her and her hands folded before her, not flinching, not pleading, only waiting, not for rescue. He understood now. He had had 4 days to understand it, only to see which man he would prove to be when it cost him something to be the better one, and the old thing had risen in him, the 9 years thing. The thing that had been made in him in a ballroom when he was 26, and had let it be seen, before 40 amused and clever people, that he loved where a man of his consequence had been thought a fool to love. The laughter that had followed him out of that room had followed him for 9 years, and he had built a wall against ever hearing it again, and the wall had held, and the wall had never once failed him. It did not fail him in the gallery. That was the horror of it. It rose up whole and cold and answered for him before his heart could get a word in, and he had heard his own voice, level and lordly and untouched, say that Miss Ellingham was a tradeswoman to whom the house owed some small courtesy for her late father's sake, and that the county did his mother far too much credit if it supposed the dowager's whims were also his own. A true sentence, near enough. That was the vileness of it. It had a door in it, and he had walked through the door and pulled it shut, and left her on the wrong side of it, named a courtesy, named a whim, named nothing at all, before 40 people and the woman who had set the trap. Lucasta had let her lashes fall to hide her triumph, and Cordula had set down upon the nearest table the flowers she had carried in, the last flowers she would ever carry to that house, and had inclined her head to him exactly as a servant inclines it to a master who has finished with her, and had gone out by the small side door where no footman waited, the very door he had once shown her as a kindness, the mended boots door, the courtesy that had stung her into surprise, and he had not followed. A duke does not follow a flower seller out of his own gallery before the assembled county. That had been the whole of his crime, that sentence and that not following, and it had cost him the earth. He had written to her the next morning. He had written 3 times. The first note came back with the seal unbroken. The second he had made humble, and it too came back, and folded within it, unspeaking, was the settlement he had caused his man of business to draw, the sum upon Bess, the thing he had thought so generous, the thing that put a 9-year-old child beyond the reach of any frost forever, sent back to him entire, untouched, the seal on that unbroken too. She had not even opened the paper that would have made her sister safe. He had sat a long time with it in his hands and understood, slowly, the size of what she had refused, and the size of what she must therefore feel, that she would let her sister go on sailing near the wind sooner than take 1 shilling from a man who had named her a whim. And the third note he did not send, because he had nothing to put in it that a note could carry. His mother found him in the library on the 4th evening, in the chair by the hearth where the fire was kept banked against his habit of reading late, though he had not read a word in 4 days. The herbal still lay upon the great table where Cordula had set it down, the old hand-coloured herbal of his grandmother's, closed upon its 300-year-old rose, and he had not let it be moved. And the not moving of it was the nearest thing to prayer his stiff heart had managed in 9 years. "You look," said the Dowager Duchess, lowering herself into the chair across from him with her stick, like a man attending his own funeral and finding the sermon unkind. "I would take an unkind sermon," he said, "and thank the man for it, if it would mend anything. It will not." She was quite a while, looking into the coals. She had begun the whole of it, he thought. She had thrown a flower seller across his path in a moment's mischief and desperation, half to spite the Dorneys and half because she had watched her son wall himself alive for 9 winters and could not bear to go to her grave with him still inside the wall. And she was grave now in a way he had rarely seen her, and older than he liked. "I set that girl in your way to vex Lucasta," she said. "I will own it. I never once thought the jest would take. And then I watched it take in you, which I'd prayed for and stopped believing I should see, and in her, which I had no right to and did not foresee. That child came to love you, Perrin. Do not shake your head at me. I have buried a husband and 3 of my own, and I know the look of a heart in trouble, and she wore it every time you left a room, and hid it better than you did, which is not saying a great deal." She set her 2 hands upon the head of her stick. "And you took that, and you killed it, to save yourself a bad quarter of an hour in a gallery. You did to that girl the very thing that was done to you, the precise thing. You let her be seen to want, and then you unwanted her before the county to keep your own dignity whole." She looked at him then, and her old eyes were wet and did not spare him. "Except that when it was done to you, my son, a room full of fools did the doing, and there was at least the poor comfort of their cruelty to hate. You she did herself, with your own mouth, and no one even laughed. There was nothing there for her to hate but you, and nothing for you now to mend it with but the same." He put his hand over his eyes. It was a long moment before he could command his voice. "I have sent," he said. "She sends it back. Of course she sends it back. You sent paper. You sent a settlement." His mother's voice cracked like a whip and then gentled. "She told you, I have no doubt, in that plain way she has, what she thought of a man who dressed a true thing in a bargain because he dared not hold it out bare. She told you at the first. She has spent her whole hard life reading the true shape of things off men who would rather she did not, and she read yours, and you have spent 4 days proving her right. If you mean to go on proving her right, stay in that chair. It is a very comfortable chair. Your father died in it, waiting to be sure of a thing before he risked himself upon it, and he was sure of it a fortnight too late, and I have never forgiven the chair." She rose with effort and stood over him. "But if there is anything left in you that is not stuffing and stubbornness, then get up and go to her, and take nothing to hold out but yourself. It is the only coin she has ever once been seen to want, and it is the only one you have never yet dared to spend." She left him. The fire settled, and Perrin sat on in the ruined quiet and looked at the closed herbal upon the table, and understood at last and wholly what he had been too proud and too frightened to let himself understand. That she was not the convenience he had named her, nor the bargain he had dressed her in, nor the folly the frost would take down by spring. That she was the one true thing that had come into his walled house in 9 years. That she had told him so, in her fashion, and warned him against it in the same breath, and carried up the stones of the cathedral she had begged him not to build, because she had not been strong enough to refuse him, and that he offered the plainest, coldest, sweetest water a thirsty man was ever given, had spat it out before the county sooner than be seen to drink. He stood. He found that his hands were quite steady, and that the steadiness this time was not the Duke's cold governance, but something newer and warmer and far more frightening, which was resolve. He did not ring for the crested carriage. He went down himself to the stable yard through the black cold and found Coombe, and told him to put the greys to nothing at all, to give him only the plain gig, the light town gig with the single lamp, and no groom, and no crest. And Coombe looked at him as though his master had asked to be driven to the moon. "I shall drive myself," Perrin said. "Go into the fire, Coombe. There is no dignity in this errand, and I will not have a witness to spare mine, for I have none left worth the sparing." And Barton, coming out bare-headed into the yard with a lantern and 40 years of beautiful blindness, said only, "Shall you want your good coat, your grace, or the plain?" And Perrin, catching the old man's meaning under the words, said, "The plain, Barton." She has had enough of the good one, and took the reins in his own 2 hands for the first time in a decade, and drove out under the arch into the wild wet dark with his heart going like a boy's. It was 4 miles to the town, the 4 miles she had walked that first morning in her mended boots, and he had never once, in all his crossings of them behind good horses, thought what they might be to a woman on foot in January. He thought of it now. The rain came slantwise and cold, and the single lamp threw a poor, guttering light, and twice the wheel went into the ruts to the axle, and he got down into the mud to his knees, and put his own shoulder to it, the Duke of Belstead, swearing softly and steadily under his breath at a stone gatepost, and got up again streaming and unhelped, and drove on, and did not turn back, and understood somewhere in the 3rd mile that he would have crawled it. The town lay dark and shuttered when he came into it, the mean street he had never in his life had cause to enter. And he found the shop by the one thing that told him, a painted board above a low-bowed window, faded Elenium, and beneath it in a smaller hand, seedsman and florist, the paint of the second word newer than the first, a daughter's hand keeping a dead father's trade alive. There was a light behind the shutter, low, a single candle. He tied the horse to the ring with hands that would not quite obey, and stood a moment in the rain before the door of the smallest house he had ever meant to enter. A man who had governed at the board and in the house, and had never in his life been so entirely without any power but the one that mattered, and knocked. There was a stillness within. Then a bolt drawn by someone small, and the door opened the width of a chain, and a child looked out at him. A little girl with a candle held up, and her father's grave eyes, and a shawl over her nightgown, 9 years old and unafraid, because she had not yet learned what there was in the world to fear. Bess. He knew her at once, though he had never seen her, by the eyes. "We are shut, sir," she said with great politeness. "We open at 7, and we have snowdrops coming and hellebore if you was wanting flowers." Then she looked at him harder, the mud, the streaming plain coat, the fine ruined boots, the face, and her certainty faltered, and she said more slowly, "Cordy, Cordy, there is a gentleman." And Cordula came out of the dark of the little shop behind the child with a taper in her hand, and stopped. She had her sleeves turned back and a smudge of green upon her wrist from the stems, and the candle showed him her face, and the wall was up in it again, the wary, some's doing look he had first met in his own conservatory doorway a lifetime and a week ago, the look of a woman who has decided precisely how much of the world she will let reach her, and will not be moved from it. She looked at him a long moment over the child's dark head, at the mud and the rain, and the master of Belstead standing hatless and unattended on her doorstep like a beggar, and something went across her face and was governed down, and she said, very evenly, "Bess, take the candle up." "I will come directly. But he is all over mud, Cordy, and it is raining, and—" "Up, sweetheart." She kissed the top of the child's head and turned her toward the stair with a hand, and the light and the small feet went up, and she came forward and stood in her own doorway in her father's shop with her arms folded against the cold and against him, and did not ask him in. "You should not have come," she said. "There is nothing here your carriage cannot do without. Whatever it is you have come to say, your grace, you may say it there where the whole street may hear it, for I have learned this fortnight to prefer things said where witnesses stand, or you may go home." "The horse will be cold." "Then let it be cold," he said. "I sent it away and drove myself, and there is no witness within 4 miles but child Abed and a wet street, and I find I do not care." Cordula, he stopped. The name he had no right to use came out of him bare, and he let it stand bare and did not dress it. "I have not come to bargain. I have nothing left to bargain with. You sent the paper back, and you were right to send it, and I have come with no pair. I have come with the only thing I never once dared hold out to you, and I am holding it out now, in the rain, on your father's step, and if you close the door in my face I shall have deserved it, and I will still be glad I came." She did not close the door. She stood very still, the way she went still when she was frightened, and he had learned at last to know the difference, and he went on before his courage could desert him, low and fast and true. "I named you a courtesy," he said, "and a whim before the county, when a single honest word would have cost me nothing but my pride and saved us both. I did it out of fear. Not fear of Lucasta, fear of being seen to want, which was done to me once cruelly and which I swore no one should ever do to me again, and so I did it to myself and to you sooner than risk it. My mother told me tonight what I could not tell myself, that I did to you the very thing that was once done to me, and worse, for at least mine was done by strangers and yours was done by the man who—" He drew a breath, and the last wall in him came down, and he let it fall. "By the man who loves you. There, I have said it plainly and out of doors and with nothing under it. Not a settlement, not a season, not a bargain in its Sunday coat. I love you, Cordula Ellingham. You told me first, in the cold green room, that the frost would have it down by spring, and you were wrong, for the frost has done its worst these 4 days, and the thing is standing yet and will not go down. I do not offer you my rank, you never wanted it, and I have watched you refuse it 3 times over. I offer you a coward who has stopped being one 4 miles too late, and asks not that you take him, only that you hear him, and believe whatever you decide that he did not, in the end, let his pride outlast his heart." The rain came down between them. Somewhere above, a small candle moved behind a curtain, and Cordula stood in her father's doorway with her arms unfolding slowly at her sides, and her clear level eyes bright and wide upon his in the dark, and her lips parted, and for the space of 3 heartbeats she said nothing at all. She did not ask him to sit, and he did not deserve to, and so the Duke of Belstead stood in the low back room of a dead man's flower shop with the snow melting from his shoulders onto her clean-swept floor, and finished saying the thing he had ridden 4 miles in the dark to say. The single tallow candle threw his shadow huge and wavering up the whitewashed wall. A kettle ticked on the small fire, and beyond the thin inner door he could hear the even breathing of a sleeping child, and it steadied him and shamed him both at once. For it told him exactly what he had gambled with when he had struck at her across the table of deeds that afternoon. "I have never in my life," he said, "asked pardon of anyone and meant it to the bottom, and I find I do not know the words, so I will use plain ones and let them be clumsy. I was cruel to you this afternoon, not by accident. I saw that I was near to loving you, and it frightened me past bearing, and so I reached for the one thing a man of my sort always has to hand, money, and the power to give it, and I laid it down between us like a wall, because a wall was safer than the thing I felt. I made you a patroness charity out of what should have been an offering. I turned a gift into a purchase, so that I might tell myself afterward it had only ever been a purchase, and that I had wanted nothing and lost nothing and was in no danger. It was the act of a coward, Cordula, and I have been a coward for 9 years, and I did not know the full size of it until I watched you walk of my house into the cold rather than be bought." She stood by a little dresser with its crack plates set up on edge, very still, her hands folded before her apron exactly as they had been folded the first morning in the conservatory when she had told a duchess to her face that there was nothing to explain. She did not fill the silence to spare him. She never had. "You should not have come," she said at last. It is 4 miles, and the road ices after dark. I have walked worse roads to worse purpose. He turned his hat once in his hands, and then made himself put it down upon the table. An unguarded thing, a man setting aside the last of his armor. I am not here to press the deed on you again. I have burned it. The freehold, the annuity, the portion for Bess, all of it in my own grate tonight, before I ordered the horse. Not because you were wrong to refuse it. Because you were right, and I could not look at the papers without seeing the use I had made of them, and I would not carry that use 1 mile further toward your door. Something moved in her face at that, not softening, not yet, but attention, the jeweller's stillness her whole family seemed to own. Then you come with empty hands, she said, which is a strange thing for the greatest man in the county. I come with worse than empty hands. He drew breath. I come to tell you that the £11 is paid. It was paid 3 weeks ago to Mr. Pruitt, the day after the hour you gave me, exactly as I said it would be, and no favour owed, and that stands, and I will hear no argument on it. For a bargain honestly struck is honestly kept, and that much at least I did not spoil. Bess's supper is safe, whatever you do with me tonight. I have put it beyond my own power to take back, so that you would know, so that you could know, past all doubting, that what I say next has no rope tied to it. I cannot buy you. I have made certain of it. There is nothing left in my hands to buy you with. And what, she said, very low, do you say next? He had faced a hostile house with less fear. He crossed the small room, slowly as he had crossed the flagstones toward her that first morning, because even now she was skittish as a wild thing, and he would not have her bolt. And he stopped a careful yard from her, and he did not reach for her hand, though every nerve in him leaned toward it. That the hour was a lie we told Lucasta Dorney, he said, and that somewhere in the middle of it stopped being a lie for me, and I have not been able to find the moment since, though I have looked for it as a man looks for the flaw in a wall that has already fallen. My mother asked you to act as though you loved me for 1 hour, to be rid of a cruel woman. I am asking you now, with no cruel woman in the county to be rid of, and no hour at the end of it, and nothing performed. I am asking whether the thing you were paid a discharge debt to pretend has become, God help us both, as true for you as it has become for me. Because it is true for me, Cordula. I did not know I had a heart left to be undone until you undid it, standing in a brown cloak among my mother's orange trees, telling us you were only what you were. I have wanted a great many acquisitions in my life and been called to all of them. I want, now, only to be permitted near you on any terms you will name for the whole of the rest of it, and I have never in 9 years said a truer sentence to a living soul. For a long moment she said nothing, and the kettle ticked, and the child breathed beyond the door, and he stood in the wreck of all his composure and let her look at him. You must understand, she said finally, and her voice was not quite steady now, what it is you are asking me to believe. That the Duke of Belstead rode through the ice to a flower shop to say he loves the girl who sweeps it. Men in your position do not do that, Perrin. They do the other thing. They send a steward with a settlement and a discreet cottage far off, and they call it kindness. And I would have died before I took it, and you knew that, which is why you have burned the papers and come with empty hands. You are clever, and you have arranged even your humility very well. But there was no cruelty in it. There were tears standing in her eyes and not falling. So I must ask you plainly once, and you must answer plainly, for I will not build my life or Bess's upon a beautiful mistake. Is it me you want, the woman, or is it the feeling of being loved for no reason but yourself, which you have gone without so long that you would mistake almost any warm, honest thing for it? Because if it is the second, my dear, you will be kind to me and grow cold in a 12-month, and I will have given up my small safe life for a great man's convalescence. He understood then that she had seen straight through to the very floor of him, as she had seen through everyone since the morning she walked in, and that she was not wrong to fear it, and that only the truth would answer her, because only the truth ever had. I do not want to be loved for no reason, he said. I have had that offered, and it is worth nothing. A name can buy that in any drawing-room in England. I want you, the particular you. The woman who knows the price of every bloom to the farthing, and would not tell my mother a comfortable lie to save her own supper. The woman who called me Perrin of Belstead in a cold green room and warned me, twice, plainly exactly how it was likeliest to end, when a schemer would have flattered me toward the altar. I have spent 9 years learning to read the ledger folded inside every kindness, and there is no ledger inside none, and it is the first honest air I have breathed since I was a young fool who let a laughing woman make a public jest of him. I do not want to convalesce. I want to be well with you, and to be worth the trusting of a person too clever to be fooled and too proud to be bought. That is the whole of it. I have no better speech. I have never had a speech at all until tonight. The first tear went down her face then, and she let it, and did not wipe it, and it was the most defenseless he had ever seen her. You are a very great deal of trouble, she said, on something that was almost a laugh and almost a sob, for a woman who has a shop to open at 6. I am aware of it. I have been told so by my mother at length. He risked, at last, one thing. He lifted his hand, slowly, and did not seize hers, but only turned it palm up between them, an open question, exactly as her own hand had once hovered above his sleeve while a duke held his breath like a boy. You told me you would warn me first, and you did. Now I am asking you to be wrong, this once, about how it ends. Will you? She looked at his open hand for the length of 3 of the child's slow breaths. Then she laid her own into it, her reddened, work-hard, honest hand, that had carried white flowers 4 miles through the frost to lay in his, and had thought nothing of it, and her fingers closed, and his closed over them, and the whole 9 years cold in him went out like a snuffed wick, and for a moment neither of them could speak at all. I have loved you, she said when she could, since the afternoon you told your mother that people are not chessmen, and made your terrible voice gentle, because I was frightened, and thought no one saw you do it. I have been very careful not to, because a flower girl who loves a duke is a figure in a ballad, and ballads end at gravesides. So you will have to bear it that I fought you the whole way and warned you, and half hoped you would not come, and am glad past all sense that you did. She drew a breath. Yes, heaven forgive us both for the cathedral we were told not to build. Yes, he did not kiss her then, though he wanted to past all bearing. He drew her hand up and bent his head and pressed his mouth to her cold fingers once, with a reverence that would have astonished any man who had ever feared him across a council table, and that was enough, and it was everything, and the candle guttered and steadied, and behind the thin door a small voice said, "Cordy, is someone crying?" And Cordula laughed wetly and called back that no one was, that a friend had come, that she must go to sleep. And the Duke of Belstead stood in the little firelit room holding a flower-seller's hand, and thought that he had never in all his consequence been anywhere he less wished to leave. He did not send a steward after that, and he did not hide her in a far cottage. He did the other thing, the harder thing, the thing that cost him the county's whispering for a season, and that he would have paid 10 times over, when the banns were read from the village church 3 Sundays running. Perrin, Duke of Belstead, and Cordula Ellingham, spinster of this parish, he stood in the family pew where his fathers had stood for 200 years, and let every craning neck in the district see precisely whom he had chosen, and where she came from, and that he was not ashamed but proud. His mother sat beside him in grey silk with her hands folded on her cane and her chin very high, and when old Lady Dorney turned in her seat, with a whisper already curling on her lip, the Dowager Duchess of Belstead met her eye with the bright, dreadful patience of a general who has already taken the ground, and Lady Dorney found she had nothing to say after all. Lucasta did not come. Lucasta, who above all things could not bear to be seen to have lost, had gone to Bath for her health and did not return. And the county learned soon enough which way the wind blew in that great house, and trimmed its manners accordingly. And the first drawing-room that had thought to cut the new Duchess found the old Duchess had cut it first, and there was an end of that. His mother said little of it to him directly, which was itself remarkable in a woman who answered everything, but he came upon her one afternoon in the small east room where the deeds had once lain scattered, and found her at the window with her cane idle in her hands, watching Cordula cross the frost-white drive below with Bess skipping at her side, and there was on the Dowager's flinty face an expression he had not seen there since he was a boy, something perilously near to peace. "You will think," she said, without turning, for she had heard his step and never pretended otherwise, "that I arranged the whole of this. That I chose her the morning she walked in with her roses, and pushed the pair of you together with my cane, and am now insufferably pleased with my own cleverness. I think, said Perrin, that you asked a frightened girl to act a thing for 1 hour to save your house, and that you had not the least notion it would take. No. She was quiet a moment. No, I had not. I meant to buy Lucasta off with a performance and send the child home with her 2 shillings and think of her no more. I am a hard old woman, Perrin, and I told myself I was only being practical. Her hands tightened on the cane's worn head. But I stood in that conservatory and heard her refuse me, refuse a duchess, to protect a 9-year-old's supper, and I knew, before you did, that I had asked a true thing to be counterfeited, and that if there was any justice left in an unjust world it would turn real in your hands and mend what that laughing vain creature broke in you 9 years since. I did not dare hope it. One does not, at 70. And here it is come real. And I find I am not too old to be foolish with gladness after all, so you will forgive me if I do not say another word about it, for I have my dignity to keep, and you are looking at me as though you might weep, which neither of us could survive. But she reached out, without looking, and found his hand, and pressed it once, hard in the only language she had ever let herself speak. And Perrin understood that the pretense his mother had commanded in her fear had become, for all 3 of them, the truest thing in the house. They were married in the spring, when the frost had at last done its work and gone. Cordula would have had it small at the village church, and he loved her for it. But he found he wanted, this once, the whole world to witness. And so they were wed in the great glass conservatory where the whole absurd blessed business had begun, among his mother's orange trees, with the doors thrown open to a garden coming green, and Bess, 9 years old and scrubbed to a shine, carried the flowers. White roses cut that morning by her sister's own no longer reddened hands, for the Ellingham shop had not been sold but kept, and ran now with a hired girl and a fresh coat of paint and Ellingham's name still gold above the door. Because Cordula would not let go the thing her father had died owing for and her hands had held afloat, and the Duke of Belstead had learned better than to offer to buy her free of anything at all. She wore no jewels she had not chosen. She made no speeches. She stood beside him in the cold green room turned suddenly to summer, and was exactly what she was, which was a great deal more than any woman who had ever scorned her, and Perrin, taking her hand before the whole assembled county, found he had to steady his voice, which had frightened parliaments and never once betrayed him, and could not quite, and did not mind. Long after, on an evening near the year's turn, he came down as he had come down that first morning, to escape nothing now, but to find her, and stopped in the doorway of the conservatory to watch before she knew he was there. She was at the far end among the winter blooms with Bess at her elbow, teaching the child the name and price of every flower to the farthing, her voice low and even and warm, and the mantel shelf beside them. In a plain little cup stood 3 stems of white hellebore, cut along the churchyard wall by her own hand that morning against all reason. The flowers that had no business at all blooming in such cold, and yet had bloomed, and yet she had thought of him. He crossed the flagstones toward her slowly, as he always would, and she heard him and turned, and her whole grave clever face opened into the smile she gave no one else in the world. And the Duke of Belstead, feared, guarded, undone, and glad of it to the marrow, gathered the woman that everyone had overlooked into his arms in the green and living room where a duchess had once ordered her to act as though she loved him, and did not let her go, and thought that she had not been acting for a very long time now, and neither, God be thanked, had he.